In the quiet suburb of Pinewood Grove, neighbors described Melissa Turner as the perfect homemaker. Her immaculate front lawn, decorated with seasonal flowers, matched her reputation as a caring mother and devoted wife. Her Facebook page showed family vacations, perfectly arranged dinner tables, and her two children's academic achievements. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But on a rainy April morning in 2018, residents of Maple Street woke to police sirens and the devastating news that Rebecca Wilson, Melissa's best friend of 15 years, had been found dead in her garage. The murder weapon? A wood-splitting axe that belonged to Rebecca's own tool shed. As investigators pieced together the horrific scene, a picture emerged of hidden jealousy, betrayal, and a friendship destroyed by the ultimate deception. What pushed this suburban housewife to commit such a brutal act against someone she once called her closest friend? This is the story of how a seemingly perfect life unraveled into a nightmare of rage and revenge. Melissa Turner met her husband Ryan during her sophomore year at Ohio State University. She was studying elementary education while he pursued a business degree with dreams of corporate success. Their romance bloomed quickly. Within a year, they were inseparable, and by graduation, Ryan had proposed with a modest diamond ring that Melissa proudly displayed to everyone who would look. "It was like something out of a storybook," said Diane Adams, Melissa's college roommate. "They were that couple everyone envied, always laughing, always planning their future together." After the wedding, the Turners settled in Pinewood Grove, a growing suburb outside Columbus that offered the perfect blend of affordable housing and good schools. Ryan secured a position at a financial consulting firm, while Melissa began teaching at Pinewood Elementary School. They purchased a 2-story colonial home on Maple Street and quickly integrated into the community. 2 years later, their daughter Emma was born, followed by their son Jack 3 years after that. As the children grew, Melissa gradually stepped back from teaching to focus on raising them. By all appearances, the Turners had achieved the American dream: a beautiful home, healthy children, financial stability, and respect from their community. Rebecca Wilson and her husband Tom moved onto Maple Street in 2003, just 3 houses down from the Turners. Rebecca, a vivacious redhead with an infectious laugh, immediately caught Melissa's attention at a neighborhood barbecue. Unlike the more reserved Melissa, Rebecca was outgoing and adventurous, qualities that Melissa found both intimidating and fascinating. "You could tell Melissa was drawn to Rebecca right away," said Eleanor Simmons, another neighbor. "Rebecca had this energy about her. She'd traveled the world before settling down, worked as a photographer for magazines, and always had the most interesting stories." Melissa seemed almost starstruck around her. Despite their different personalities, the 2 women formed a fast friendship. Their husbands got along well, both men enjoying weekend golf outings while the women shopped or took the children to various activities. The Wilsons had 1 daughter, Lily, who was between Emma and Jack in age, making family gatherings convenient and enjoyable for everyone. As the years passed, Melissa and Rebecca became inseparable. They joined the same book club, volunteered at school functions together, and even started a small home decor business that gave Melissa a creative outlet and supplemental income. They shared holidays, family vacations, and countless everyday moments that cemented their bond as more than neighbors or friends. They considered themselves sisters. "They knew everything about each other," said Patricia Holloway, a member of their book club. "Whenever one of them started a story, the other could finish it. They had inside jokes, matching bracelets, and this weird ability to communicate with just a look. I remember feeling a little jealous of their closeness." Behind the scenes, however, not everything was as idyllic as it appeared. By 2016, 15 years into their marriage, Ryan Turner's consulting business was facing difficulties. The economy had shifted, clients were cutting back on contracts, and the financial pressure began mounting. The Turners started arguing more frequently about money, though they kept their struggles private from neighbors and friends. Around the same time, Rebecca's photography career was flourishing. After years of freelance work, she had secured a position with a prestigious home and garden magazine that allowed her to travel for photo shoots while maintaining her family life. Tom Wilson had been promoted to senior management at his engineering firm, and the couple's financial situation was more comfortable than ever. The economic disparity between the families created subtle tension. When the Wilsons renovated their kitchen with high-end appliances and granite countertops, Melissa smiled and expressed delight for her friend while privately feeling the sting of envy. When the Wilsons purchased a new SUV, Melissa convinced Ryan they needed to upgrade their aging sedan, despite their budget concerns. "I started noticing changes in Melissa around that time," said Diane Adams, who remained close with Melissa after college. "She became more focused on appearances. She was always comparing her life to others on social media, obsessing over what she called keeping up. It wasn't like the Melissa I knew in college, who was so grounded and content with simple things." Despite these undercurrents, the friendship between the two women remained strong on the surface. They continued their tradition of Friday coffee dates, where they would spend hours at Pinewood Cafe, discussing their lives, families, and dreams. It was during one of these coffee sessions in early January 2018 that Rebecca confided in Melissa about concerns in her marriage. "Tom is so distant lately," Rebecca had whispered over her latte. "He's always working late, constantly on his phone. Sometimes I wonder if he's losing interest in me." Melissa had been supportive, offering reassurance and advice as any good friend would. "All marriages go through phases," she told Rebecca. "Ryan and I had a rough patch last year too. It'll pass." What Melissa didn't reveal was that she and Ryan were still in their rough patch. Their arguments about finances had escalated to include disagreements about parenting, household responsibilities, and their intimate life. Ryan had become increasingly distant, often staying late at the office or going out with colleagues after work. Melissa found herself feeling lonely and underappreciated, though she maintained the appearance of contentment to everyone, including Rebecca. As winter turns to spring, Melissa notices subtle changes in Rebecca's behavior. Her usually outgoing friend became more secretive about her phone, changed her password, and occasionally cancelled their coffee dates with vague excuses. Initially, Melissa attributed these changes to Rebecca's busy work schedule and marriage difficulties. In late March, Emma Turner, now 14, mentioned something that caught Melissa's attention. "Mom, I saw Mr. Wilson having lunch with Dad yesterday at Riverside Grill. I waved, but I don't think they saw me." This seemed odd to Melissa. Ryan and Tom were friendly, but rarely spent time together without the women organizing it. When she casually asked Ryan about it that evening, he seemed flustered before explaining that they had met to discuss investing in a property together. "Tom has some extra capital right now, and I've found a commercial property that could be a good opportunity for us," Ryan explained. "I wanted to get his thoughts before bringing it to you, since it's still just an idea." The explanation made sense, and Melissa thought little more of it. In fact, she felt a small surge of hope that Ryan's business might be turning around with this new venture. However, she did find it strange that Rebecca hadn't mentioned anything about the potential investment during their most recent conversations. The following week, Melissa was shopping at the local mall when she spotted a familiar figure in the jewelry store, Ryan examining what appeared to be women's necklaces. Curious and a little excited at the thought he might be purchasing a surprise gift for her, Melissa ducked behind a display to observe. After several minutes, Ryan selected a gold pendant with a small diamond. Melissa smiled to herself, wondering if it was for their upcoming anniversary in May. That evening, Ryan arrived home later than usual, claiming a client meeting had run long. There was no mention of the jewelry store or a gift. Melissa considered asking him directly, but decided to wait, not wanting to ruin a potential surprise. 2 days later, while Ryan was in the shower, Melissa heard his phone buzz repeatedly on the nightstand. Normally, she would never check his messages, but something, intuition perhaps, compelled her to glance at the screen. A text message preview was visible. "Can't wait to see you wear it. Same time tomorrow?" The sender was listed as TW Consulting. Melissa felt her heart rate quicken. TW, could it be Tom Wilson? Why would Ryan label Rebecca's husband that way in his contacts? And what was it that someone would be wearing? The necklace she had seen him purchase. Over the next few days, Melissa became hyper-aware of Ryan's movements and behavior. She noticed him checking his phone more frequently, smiling at messages, and taking calls in another room. He claimed to be working late 3 nights in 1 week, something that hadn't happened in months. Rather than confronting Ryan directly, Melissa decided to watch and gather more information. She began paying closer attention to Rebecca as well, noting that her friend had recently started wearing new clothes, styling her hair differently, and applying makeup more carefully than before. During their Friday coffee meeting, Rebecca seemed distracted and checked her watch repeatedly. "I have to cut this short today," she said apologetically. "The magazine needs me to review some proofs before Monday." "On a Friday afternoon?" Melissa asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Deadlines," Rebecca replied with a shrug. "You know how it is." As Rebecca hurried out of the cafe, Melissa felt a growing sense of unease. She found herself making a decision that just weeks earlier would have been unthinkable. Instead of driving home, she followed Rebecca's car at a discreet distance. To Melissa's surprise, Rebecca did not head toward her home or the local printing shop she often used for work. Instead, she drove to the Hamilton Hotel, an upscale establishment on the outskirts of town. Melissa watched from her car as Rebecca checked her appearance in her visor mirror, applied fresh lipstick, and then entered the hotel lobby. Melissa sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, as minutes turned into an hour. She was about to leave when a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. Ryan's silver Audi. She watched in disbelief as her husband parked, straightened his tie in the rearview mirror, and walked into the same hotel. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The pieces began falling into place. The secretive phone calls, the late nights, the unexplained lunch, the jewelry purchase, the text message, the carefully applied makeup and new clothes. Melissa felt physically ill as the reality of the situation became undeniable. After sitting in stunned silence for nearly 20 minutes, Melissa drove home in a daze. Her mind raced through years of memories. Family barbecues, joint vacations, children's birthday parties, all now tainted by what appeared to be a profound betrayal by the 2 people she trusted most. At home, Melissa went through the motions of preparing dinner for Emma and Jack, maintaining a facade of normalcy while internally processing the devastating discovery. She told the children their father was working late again and would miss dinner. Ryan returned home around 9 that evening, offering the same explanation about work. Melissa nodded and said little, studying his face for signs of guilt or deception. He seemed relaxed, even cheerful, mentioning a potential new client that could turn everything around for his business. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Did you and Rebecca have your usual coffee date?" The casual mention of Rebecca's name sent a surge of anger through Melissa, but she contained it. "Yes," she replied simply. "Nothing special." That night, lying beside her sleeping husband, Melissa wrestled with her thoughts. Should she confront Ryan immediately? Should she talk to Rebecca first? Should she tell Tom? Or should she gather more evidence before making accusations that would irrevocably change 4 lives and impact their children? By morning, Melissa had made a decision. She needed absolute certainty before confronting anyone. She would continue observing, documenting patterns, and if necessary, find concrete evidence of the affair. The teacher needed facts, not just suspicions, no matter how strong. Over the next 2 weeks, Melissa became a detective in her own life. She noted Ryan's schedule, checked odometer readings on his car, created excuses to call him at the office when he claimed to be working late, and paid careful attention to Rebecca's behavior and comments. The evidence mounted. Ryan's late nights coincided with evenings when Tom Wilson was traveling for work. Rebecca had started making excuses to avoid family gatherings. Both Ryan and Rebecca had new inside jokes and references that excluded Melissa. Most damning of all, Melissa spotted Rebecca wearing a gold pendant with a small diamond, identical to the one she had seen Ryan purchase. Despite the pain of each new discovery, Melissa maintained her composure. She continued making family dinners, helping with homework, attending PTA meetings, and even participating in her regular activities with Rebecca, all while carrying the weight of her knowledge. Looking back, I'm amazed at how well she held it together, Diane Adams would later tell investigators. When she called me during that time, she mentioned being stressed about Ryan's work and some issues with the kids, but never once hinted at what she must have been going through. That level of self-control is frightening in retrospect. The breaking point came on April 17, 2018. Ryan had told Melissa he would be out of town overnight for a business meeting in Cincinnati. That same morning, Rebecca mentioned she had a photo shoot scheduled in the same city and would be staying overnight as well. Too coincidental to ignore, Melissa decided to follow through on a plan she had been considering. After dropping the children at school, she drove to the Wilsons' house. Using the spare key Rebecca had given her years ago for emergencies, Melissa entered the empty home. Her hands trembled as she searched for evidence, anything that would either confirm her worst fears or, as she desperately hoped, prove them unfounded. In Rebecca's home office, Melissa found a leather-bound planner. Flipping through its pages, she discovered hotel reservations, not just for that night in Cincinnati, but for previous dates that aligned perfectly with Ryan's unexplained absences. Then she found something else, a handwritten letter tucked between the pages, unmistakably in Ryan's handwriting. Rebecca, what we're doing would destroy them both if they ever found out. Sometimes I feel guilty, but when I'm with you, nothing else seems to matter. I've never felt this way before, not even when Melissa and I first met. I know we said this would be temporary, just until we figured things out, but I'm starting to think about a future where we don't have to hide. Would you consider that possibility? Always yours, Ryan. The letter was dated just 1 week earlier. The words blurred as tears filled Melissa's eyes. Not only were they having an affair, but they were contemplating a future together. A future that would destroy both families. In a state of numbed shock, Melissa replaced the planner and letter exactly as she had found them and left the house. She drove aimlessly for hours, eventually finding herself at Riverside Park, where she and Rebecca had taken their children to play countless times over the years. Sitting on a bench overlooking the water, Melissa felt something inside her shift and hardened. By the time she returned home to prepare dinner for her children, Melissa Turner had made another decision. This betrayal would not stand. 15 years of friendship, 15 years of marriage, all destroyed by the 2 people she had trusted most in the world. That night, after putting Emma and Jack to bed, Melissa sat in the darkness of her kitchen and began to formulate a plan. On the refrigerator hung a family photo from last summer's vacation, the Turners and the Wilsons together at Lake Michigan, all smiles and sunburned noses. Melissa stared at Rebecca's face, the face of her best friend, the woman who had now taken everything from her. "I'll never forget what she did to me," Melissa whispered to the empty room. "Never." The morning after discovering Ryan's letter, Melissa woke with a strange sense of calm. She made breakfast for her children as usual, helped them prepare for school, and kissed them goodbye at the bus stop with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Neighbors who saw her that morning would later tell investigators that nothing seemed amiss. "She waved to me while getting her mail," said Harold Jenkins, who lived across the street, "asked about my wife's surgery, and reminded me about the neighborhood. Watch meeting next week, completely normal." But inside, Melissa was methodically planning her next steps. Rather than confronting Ryan immediately upon his return from Cincinnati, she decided to gather more information. She needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. After the children left for school, Melissa called in sick to her part-time job at the library, something she had rarely done in 3 years of employment. Then she drove to an electronics store in a neighboring town and purchased a voice-activated recording device. Using cash and avoiding conversation with the sales clerk, she slipped in and out without drawing attention. The customer was very specific about what she wanted. The sales associate would later tell police. She didn't want anything connected to Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. She wanted something simple that would record conversations and could be hidden easily. "I thought she might be dealing with a difficult landlord or workplace situation." Back at home, Melissa strategically placed the device under the center console of Ryan's car, securing it with adhesive tape where it wouldn't be discovered during routine use. She then spent the afternoon meticulously going through bank statements, phone records, and credit card bills from the past 6 months, creating a timeline of suspicious activities and unexplained expenses. A pattern emerged: dinners at restaurants they never frequented as a couple, charges at the Hamilton Hotel, a weekend trip to Chicago when Ryan had claimed to be at a business conference, and a jewelry purchase larger than the pendant she had seen, suggesting there were gifts she hadn't yet discovered. When Ryan called that evening to say he was on his way home from Cincinnati, Melissa greeted the news with practiced enthusiasm. "Great. The kids missed you. I'll warm up for dinner." Upon his arrival, she noticed the subtle signs that now seemed glaringly obvious. The lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume, the way he showered immediately despite claiming exhaustion from the drive, the defensive tone when she casually asked how his meetings had gone. Over the next 3 days, Melissa maintained an outward appearance of normalcy while inwardly documenting every inconsistency in Ryan's behavior. She watched as he and Rebecca exchanged seemingly innocent greetings at a school function, noting the careful distance they maintained in public and the fleeting moments when their eyes met across the room. Each night after Ryan fell asleep, Melissa retrieved the recording device from his car and listened to the day's conversations. Most were mundane: client calls, drive-through orders, radio stations. But on the 3rd day, she heard what she had been waiting for: a conversation between Ryan and Rebecca. "We need to be more careful," Rebecca's voice came through clearly. Melissa asked about the Cincinnati trip specifically. "I think she might suspect something." "She doesn't," Ryan replied confidently. "She's too trusting. Besides, we've covered our tracks well. The business investment story is holding up. I just worry about her. She's my best friend, Ryan. Sometimes I can barely look her in the eye anymore. Do you want to end this?" His voice sounded tense. A pause. "No. God help me. But no, I don't. When will we meet again? Tom leaves for Seattle on Tuesday, right? We could use my office. No one stays late on Tuesdays." Melissa listened to the recording 3 times, her hands steady as she transcribed every word into a notebook she had designated for evidence. The cold calculation in their voices, discussing her trust as a weakness to be exploited, planning their next encounter around her ignorance, solidified something in Melissa. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a passing infatuation. This was a sustained campaign of deception by the two people she had loved most. The following day, Melissa invited Rebecca for coffee at Pinewood Cafe, their usual Friday spot. As they sat across from each other, Melissa studied her friend's face, the slight shadows under her eyes, the nervous energy in her movements, the way she checked her phone more frequently than normal. "Everything okay with you and Tom?" Melissa asked innocently, stirring her latte. "You seem distracted lately." Rebecca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're fine. Just busy, you know how it is. His Seattle trip next week has him stressed about some project deadlines." "Seattle? That's exciting. How long will he be gone?" "Just 3 days. Nothing exciting about it, really. All business." Melissa nodded sympathetically. "Ryan's the same way with his trips. Always working, barely sees the cities he visits." She paused, watching Rebecca's reaction. "Actually, he mentioned that Tom might be interested in investing in that commercial property they discussed. Has he talked to you about that?" The momentary panic in Rebecca's eyes was subtle, but unmistakable. "Oh, yes, vaguely. Tom doesn't always tell me about potential investments until they're more concrete." "That's smart," Melissa said, her voice pleasant while her mind catalogued another lie. "Men and their business ventures. Sometimes I think they forget we're capable of understanding these things too." The conversation drifted to safer topics, their children's activities, an upcoming school fundraiser, a new restaurant in town, but Melissa remained acutely aware of each time Rebecca checked her watch or phone. The coffee meeting that typically lasted 2 hours ended after just 45 minutes when Rebecca claimed to have a deadline for work. As Melissa watched her friend hurry out of the cafe, she felt a strange detachment. Rebecca, walking away, wasn't the woman who had held her hand during childbirth, who had brought meals for weeks after her father died, who had celebrated every milestone in their lives together. That Rebecca had been replaced by a stranger wearing her face, someone capable of the ultimate betrayal. Over the weekend, Melissa maintained her role as devoted wife and mother. She took the children to their activities, prepared Ryan's favorite meals, and even suggested a family movie night that had everyone laughing together on the couch. Only once, when Emma asked why her father kept checking his phone during the film, did Melissa's smile falter momentarily. "Probably work stuff, honey," she said lightly. "You know how important Dad's job is." On Monday morning, after sending everyone off to school and work, Melissa drove to a hardware store 20 miles from Pinewood Grove. She purchased work gloves, plastic sheeting, cleaning supplies, and a new axe with a solid oak handle. "Planning. Some yard work?" asked the cheerful cashier. "Just some tree trimming," Melissa replied with a pleasant smile. "Spring cleaning." She paid in cash once again and loaded the supplies into her trunk. On the drive home, she stopped at a less frequented grocery store and purchased a burner phone using the same cash payment method. In the parking lot, she programmed just one number into it: Rebecca's. That evening, Melissa was unusually attentive to Ryan, suggesting they open a bottle of wine after the children went to bed. As they sat in the living room, she steered the conversation toward his business prospects. "You mentioned that property investment with Tom?" she said casually. "How's that progressing?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "It's still in the early stages. Tom wants more time to consider the numbers." "That makes sense. It's a big decision." Melissa sipped her wine. "I was thinking maybe I could help somehow. I could meet with you both, offer a different perspective." "No," Ryan said quickly, then softened his tone. "I mean, it's not necessary. We'll figure it out. Business stuff is boring anyway." "Nothing about your work is boring to me," Melissa replied, maintaining eye contact until Ryan looked away first. Later that night, while Ryan slept, Melissa retrieved the latest recording from his car. As expected, it contained a conversation between Ryan and Rebecca discussing their plans for the following day, Tuesday, when Tom would be in Seattle and the children had after-school activities. "My office at 4:30, Ryan's voice instructed. "I'll make sure everyone's gone by then." "I'll bring that bottle of wine we liked," Rebecca responded, her voice intimate in a way Melissa had never heard before. "And maybe that thing you bought me last month." Their laughter, shared over a private joke that excluded her, was the final confirmation Melissa needed. She erased the recording, returned the device to its hiding place, and went inside to finalize her plan. Tuesday morning arrived with a spring thunderstorm that matched Melissa's internal turbulence. She dressed with particular care, selecting a casual outfit that would draw no attention, but was also practical for what lay ahead. She dropped the children at school, completed her volunteer shift at the library, and attended her weekly yoga class, establishing a normal routine that multiple people would later confirm. At 2:30 p.m., she texted Ryan from her regular phone, picking up kids from activities later. "Don't forget Emma's recital this weekend." His reply came quickly. "Got it. Working late tonight, don't wait up." Using the burner phone, she then sent a message to Rebecca. "Need to talk urgently. Can't do it at home or over a regular phone. Please, meet at your house at 4:15. It's about the kids. We'll explain everything." Rebecca's response showed confusion but concern. "Is everything okay? I have plans at 4:30 but can cancel if it's important." "It is. Please don't tell anyone yet. Just need 15 minutes of your time, trying to keep this quiet until we figure it out." After receiving Rebecca's agreement to meet, Melissa drove home and changed into nondescript clothing, jeans, a dark sweatshirt, and running shoes. She loaded the supplies from the hardware store into a duffel bag, placing it in her trunk along with the axe. Then she drove to Rebecca's house, parking a block away and approaching from the rear alley that ran behind the properties. Rebecca's garage had a side door that was rarely locked, a security oversight Melissa had mentioned several times over the years. Now she was counting on that carelessness as she slipped into the garage at 4:05 p.m., wearing the work gloves and carrying her duffel bag. The garage was tidy and organized, reflecting Rebecca's methodical nature. Tom's tools hung on a pegboard, garden equipment was stacked against one wall, and seasonal decorations were stored in labeled bins. Melissa quickly laid plastic sheeting over a section of the concrete floor, then positioned herself behind the door and waited, the axe resting against her leg. At 4:18 p.m., she heard Rebecca's car pull into the driveway. The garage door began to rise electronically. Rebecca entered through the interior door, connecting the garage to the house, her back to Melissa as she set down her purse and keys on a workbench. "Melissa," she called out, glancing around the garage. "Where are you? What's going on with the kids?" When Rebecca turned, her eyes widened at the sight of her friend standing there. "How long?" Melissa asked quietly. Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to realization, then to fear. "Melissa, I don't know what you're—" "The affair with Ryan. How long?" The color drained from Rebecca's face. She took a step backward. "We should sit down and talk about this. I can explain." "Like you explained where you were going today? To meet him at his office at 4:30, to drink wine and wear the jewelry he bought you?" Rebecca's hand moved to her throat, where the gold pendant rested against her skin. "You've been spying on us." "I've been uncovering the truth," Melissa corrected, her voice eerily calm. 15 years of friendship, 15 years of marriage, and you destroyed it all for what? Secret hotel meetings, office rendezvous, planning a future together. "It wasn't supposed to happen," Rebecca whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "We never meant to hurt you," Melissa laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the garage. "You never meant for me to find out. That's different." Rebecca took another step back, her body tensing as she noticed the axe for the first time. Melissa, you're scaring me. Let's just talk about this rationally. We can work through this. Like adults. Is that what you were going to say? Melissa picked up the axe, feeling its weight in her gloved hands. Was it adult behavior to sleep with my husband, to lie to my face every day, to pretend to be my friend while planning to take my life apart? I'm sorry, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. It was wrong. We were wrong. Please just put that down. Sorry doesn't fix this, Melissa replied, advancing slowly. Sorry, don't erase the images in my head of you together. Sorry, don't give me back the years I trusted you both. Rebecca's back hit the workbench. Her hand fumbled behind her, searching for something to defend herself with. Think about the children, Melissa. Emma, Jack, Lily. They need us. You should have thought about them before you started sleeping with my husband. What happened next would be pieced together by forensic experts and crime scene analysts in the weeks that followed. The evidence indicated that Rebecca attempted to flee toward the interior door, but slipped on the plastic sheeting Melissa had laid down. Melissa swung the axe, striking Rebecca in the upper back. The first blow wasn't immediately fatal. Rebecca attempted to crawl toward the door, leaving a trail of blood across the garage floor. Melissa struck again and again, a total of 7 times, according to the medical examiner's report. The final blow to the back of Rebecca's head caused the fatal injury. In the sudden silence that followed, Melissa stood over her friend's body, her breathing heavy but controlled. She checked her watch, 4:32 p.m. Ryan would be waiting for Rebecca at his office. Tom was in Seattle. The children were at their activities for another hour. With methodical precision, Melissa began implementing the second phase of her plan. She used the cleaning supplies to remove her fingerprints from the door handles and any surfaces she had touched. She left the axe, now covered in Rebecca's blood, and her own gloved fingerprints next to the body, positioning it to appear as though it had been dropped after use. From her duffel bag, she removed a pair of Tom Wilson's work boots that she had taken from their mudroom during a previous visit. Wearing gloves, she created several bloody footprints leading from the body toward the side door, then carefully placed the boots back in the duffel bag. Next, she removed a folded piece of paper from her pocket, a printed email exchange between Rebecca and Ryan discussing their plans to leave their spouses. Melissa had fabricated the document using knowledge of their email addresses and writing styles. She placed it deliberately on the workbench where it would be easily discovered, but not so obvious as to arouse suspicion. After checking the garage once more for any evidence of her presence, Melissa removed the plastic sheeting, folded it carefully to contain any blood, and placed it in her duffel bag along with her gloves. She exited through the side door, making sure it remained unlocked as it had been when she arrived. Walking calmly down the alley, Melissa returned to her car. She drove to a shopping center 3 towns away, where she disposed of the duffel bag, gloves, and plastic sheeting in various dumpsters. She then stopped at a car wash to thoroughly clean her vehicle. By 6 p.m., Melissa had picked up her children from their activities. By 7:30 p.m., she was preparing dinner while helping with homework. Her clothes changed, and her demeanor perfectly normal. When Ryan called to say he would be home late, she responded with the right amount of disappointment but understanding. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice sounding strained. "Everything's fine here," Melissa replied lightly. "The kids are doing homework. I made that pasta you like." "Great," he said distantly. "Save me some. I might be very late." Melissa hung up and smiled at her children across the kitchen counter. "Who wants ice cream after dinner?" At 9:38 p.m., Melissa's phone rang. The caller ID showed Tom Wilson's name. She answered with casual friendliness, though her heart raced. "Tom, how's Seattle?" "Melissa." His voice was tight with panic. "Is Rebecca with you? I've been trying to reach her for hours." "No," she replied, injecting concern into her voice. "I haven't seen her since this morning at school drop-off. Is everything okay? She's not answering her phone or texts. It's not like her, especially when I'm traveling. I'm getting worried. Have you called Ryan? Maybe she had to help with something at his office. I know they were discussing that investment." "Property?" The slight pause on Tom's end suggested he found the suggestion unusual. "No, I haven't. Why would she be at Ryan's office?" "Oh, I don't know." Melissa backpedaled smoothly. "Just trying to think of where she might be. Should I drive by your house and check? I can have Ryan stay with the kids." "Would you? That would be great. I'm trying to get an earlier flight home, but the earliest I can get there is tomorrow morning." "Of course," Melissa assured him. "That's what friends are for. I'll call you right back after I check the house." Hanging up, Melissa called Ryan's cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. She left a message asking him to come home to watch the kids while she checked on Rebecca for Tom. Then she called their neighbor, Eleanor Simmons, and asked if she could sit with Emma and Jack for 30 minutes. "Rebecca isn't answering her phone, and Tom's worried sick from Seattle," she explained. "I just want to drive by and make sure everything's okay." Eleanor agreed immediately, arriving within minutes. Melissa thanked her, grabbed her keys, and drove to the Wilsons' house, her expression appropriately concerned for anyone who might be watching. She parked in the driveway and knocked on the front door. After receiving no answer, she tried calling Rebecca's phone, hearing it ring faintly from inside the house. With deliberate hesitation, she used her spare key to enter, calling Rebecca's name as she moved through the darkened rooms. When she reached the door to the garage, Melissa paused, took a deep breath, and opened it. The scene before her was exactly as she had left it, though the blood had begun to darken and congeal on the concrete floor. Her scream, according to Eleanor Simmons, who later spoke to reporters, could be heard all the way down Maple Street. The Pinewood Grove Police Department received Melissa's frantic 911 call at 10:17 p.m. Officer Kevin Murphy, who had coached Jack Turner's Little League team the previous summer, was the first to arrive at the Wilson residence. He found Melissa sitting on the front steps, visibly shaking and hyperventilating. "She's in there," Melissa gasped between sobs. "In the garage. There's so much blood. Oh, God, Rebecca." Officer Murphy called for backup and emergency medical services before cautiously entering the house. What he discovered in the garage matched Melissa's description, a gruesome scene that would haunt even this experienced officer for years to come. "In 18 years on the force, I'd never seen that level of violence in our community," Murphy would later testify. The victim had suffered multiple traumatic injuries, consistent with an attack using the axe found at the scene. It was immediately apparent that this was not an accident or robbery gone wrong. This was personal. Detective Samantha Reeves arrived 20 minutes later and took charge of the rapidly expanding investigation. As the lead detective for Pinewood Grove's small police department, Reeves had handled domestic disputes, drunk driving incidents, and occasional break-ins, but never a homicide of this magnitude. "Secure the perimeter," she instructed the uniformed officers. "No one in or out, except essential personnel. I want photographs of everything before anything's moved." While the crime scene technicians began their methodical documentation, Detective Reeves turned her attention to Melissa, who was now sitting in a patrol car wrapped in a shock blanket. Eleanor Simmons had taken the Turner children to her home to shield them from the unfolding horror. "Mrs. Turner," Reeves began gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions while your memory is fresh." Melissa nodded, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. "I understand. I want to help find whoever did this to Rebecca. Can you walk me through what happened tonight? Start from when you received the call from Mr. Wilson." Melissa recounted the events with remarkable clarity, despite her apparent emotional distress. She described Tom's concern about being unable to reach Rebecca, her offer to check the house, and the horrifying discovery in the garage. Did you notice anything unusual? Any signs of forced entry? Items missing? Anyone in the area who didn't belong? No. Melissa shook her head. The front door was locked when I arrived. I used my key. Rebecca gave me 1 year ago for emergencies. Everything inside looked normal until... Her voice broke. Until I opened the garage door. And why did you go to the garage specifically? I heard her phone ringing faintly when I called it from inside the house. I followed the sound. Detective Reeves made notes, her expression professionally neutral. I understand you and Mrs. Wilson were close friends. To your knowledge, did she have any enemies? Anyone who might want to harm her? Melissa stared into the middle distance. Everyone loved Rebecca. She was perfect. A tear slid down her cheek. The only person I can think of who might have had an issue with her recently is Tom. Her husband? Why do you say that? They'd been having problems. Rebecca confided in me that she was worried about their marriage. Tom's been distant, working late, traveling more. She suspected... Melissa paused as if reluctant to continue. Suspected what, Mrs. Turner? That he might be having an affair. She had no proof, but she said things weren't right between them for months. And Tom has a temper. I've never seen it directed at Rebecca, but I've heard him yell at their daughter and slam doors during arguments. Detective Reeves wrote this information down carefully. We'll need to speak with Mr. Wilson as soon as possible. I understand he's out of town? Seattle. Business trip. He's trying to get a flight back tonight. As their conversation concluded, a crime scene technician approached Detective Reeves and discreetly handed her an evidence bag containing a folded document. Found this on the workbench in the garage, Detective. Thought you should see it right away. Reeves examined the email printout through the clear plastic. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but her posture stiffened slightly. Mrs. Turner, we may need to speak with you again later. Is there someone who can stay with you tonight? My husband should be home soon. I need to get back to my children. Of course. An officer will drive you to retrieve your children and then escort you home. As Melissa was escorted away, Detective Reeves returned to the crime scene, where the medical examiner was completing his preliminary assessment. Time of death appears to be between 4 and 5 p.m., Dr. Martinson reported. 7 distinct wounds, all consistent with the axe found at the scene. The first several strikes were to the back and shoulders, but the fatal blow was to the occipital region of the skull. Whoever did this had considerable upper body strength. Or adrenaline, Reeves noted, surveying the bloody footprints leading toward the side door. Men's work boots, size 11 or 12 by the look of them. Are they consistent with the victim's husband? We'll need his shoes for comparison, but it's the right general size for an adult male. And this, Reeves held up the evidence bag containing the email, correspondence between the victim and Ryan Turner, Melissa Turner's husband. Apparently, they were having an affair and planning to leave their spouses. Dr. Martinson whistled. Softly. That complicates things. It certainly does. We now have multiple potential suspects with strong motives. Tom Wilson, if he discovered his wife's infidelity. Ryan Turner, if the affair went sour. And Melissa Turner, if she learned her husband was planning to leave her for her best friend. By midnight, the quiet suburb of Pinewood Grove had transformed into an active crime scene. News vans assembled at the perimeter of police tape, neighbors gathered in small clusters on front lawns despite the late hour, and social media buzzed. With speculation and shock, Ryan Turner arrived home at 12:43 a.m. to find police officers waiting to speak with him. His disheveled appearance and obvious anxiety immediately caught Detective Reeves's attention. Mr. Turner, where have you been this evening? She asked as they sat at the kitchen table. Melissa was upstairs with the children, who had finally fallen. Asleep after hours of questions and tears. Working late at my office, Ryan answered, his voice hoarse. Client meeting that ran long, then paperwork. Can anyone verify your presence at the office? Ryan hesitated. The cleaning staff might have seen me. I was alone most of the evening. Your wife tried to reach you several times tonight. Why didn't you answer? My phone died. I forgot my charger. He ran a hand through his hair. Look, what's this about? Melissa said something happened to Rebecca, but she was too upset to explain fully. Detective Reeves studied him carefully before responding. Mrs. Wilson was found murdered in her garage this evening. Your wife discovered the body after Mr. Wilson called, concerned about his wife's whereabouts. The color drained from Ryan's face. Murdered? That's impossible. When was the last time you saw or spoke with Mrs. Wilson? Ryan's eyes darted briefly toward the stairs, where Melissa might be listening. A few days ago, maybe. At school drop-off. Not today. You didn't have plans to meet her. No, why would I? Reeves removed a photocopy of the email from her folder and slid it across the table. This was found at the crime scene, Mr. Turner. You had to explain? Ryan stared at the document, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. This isn't... I never wrote this. This isn't real. So you're denying having an affair with Rebecca Wilson? Yes, I mean... He stopped abruptly, visibly struggling with his response. This email is fabricated. I never wrote anything about leaving my wife. Detective Reeves noted his careful wording. But you were having a relationship with Mrs. Wilson. Ryan's shoulders slumped. It was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake that just happened, but we ended it weeks ago. And we never discussed leaving our spouses. Never. Does your wife know about this mistake? No. At least I don't think so. We didn't want to hurt anyone. The interrogation continued for another hour, with Ryan eventually admitting to a 6-month affair that had indeed ended several weeks earlier, not by mutual decision, but because Rebecca had broken it off, citing guilt and fear of discovery.
Gau fydda ed hwy a cael cyndynyxia at this floors of revolver her minded hurry o mum have a cove on back.
Honestly, the guilt was eating me alive too. I just wanted things to go back to normal. Back to normal, Detective Reeves repeated skeptically, after betraying your wife with her best friend. Ryan had no response to that. By morning, Tom Wilson had returned from Seattle and was subjected to similar questioning. His alibi was solid, multiple. Witnesses confirmed his presence at business meetings, and security footage verified his whereabouts at the time of the murder. His genuine shock and devastation at learning of his wife's affair and murder convinced Detective Reeves that he was unlikely to be the perpetrator, despite the bloody boot prints matching his shoe size. Someone's setting me up, Tom insisted. Through his grief, I would never hurt Rebecca, never. Despite everything, I loved her. As the investigation progressed, forensic evidence began painting a clearer picture. The axe handle contained microscopic fibers from latex gloves, suggesting the killer had been prepared and careful. The blood spatter analysis indicated the attacker was likely between 5'4" and 5'8" tall, consistent with Melissa's height of 5'6", but not with Tom's 6'1" or Ryan's 5'11". Most damning were the surveillance cameras from a gas station 2 blocks from the Wilson residence, which had captured footage of Melissa's Honda CR-V driving toward the house at 4:03 p.m., nearly 6 hours before she claimed to have discovered the body. 5 days after the murder, Detective Reeves and 2 officers arrived at the Turner home. With an arrest warrant, they found Melissa in the backyard, planting spring flowers with her daughter. "Melissa Turner," Detective Reeves announced formally, "you're under arrest for the murder of Rebecca Wilson." Emma screamed as the officers handcuffed her mother. Melissa remained eerily calm, her dirt-covered gardening gloves still on her hands. "Call Diane Adams," she instructed her daughter. "Tell her to contact our lawyer and to take care of you and Jack until your father gets home." At the police station, Melissa exercised her right to remain silent until her attorney arrived. Jeffrey Bauer, a respected criminal defense lawyer from Columbus, advised her to continue her silence. But Melissa surprised both Bauer and Detective Reeves by declaring her intention to make a full confession. "Are you certain about this?" Bauer asked. "The evidence they have is largely circumstantial. There are other viable suspects. We can fight this." "I'm tired of fighting," Melissa replied quietly, "tired of pretending." With the recording device activated and all legal protocols observed, Melissa Turner provided a detailed account of her crime. She described discovering the affair, gathering evidence, planning the murder, and executing it with methodical precision. Her voice never wavered, her demeanor remained composed, and her recollection of details was unsettlingly precise. "Why are you confessing?" Detective Reeves asked. "You created a solid plan with multiple misdirections. You might have gotten away with it." Melissa smiled faintly. "Getting away with it was never the point." "Then what was?" "Justice. Consequences. Rebecca betrayed me in the worst possible way, then thought she could just walk away and salvage her. Perfect life. Ryan, too. They both needed to understand that actions have repercussions." "So this is about revenge?" "Justice," Melissa corrected again. "Rebecca's dead, and she deserved that. But Ryan, he has to live with this forever. He has to look into our children's eyes and know that his selfish choices destroyed their mother's life, their friend's life, and their childhood innocence. That's his punishment. Far worse than death, don't you think?" The calculated cruelty in her statement chilled even the experienced detective. "You realize you'll likely spend the rest of your life in prison." "I considered that possibility when I decided to kill her," Melissa acknowledged calmly. "Some prices are worth paying." The case of Ohio versus Turner proceeded relatively quickly through the legal system. Despite her confession, Melissa's attorney entered a plea of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, arguing that the extreme emotional trauma of discovering her husband's affair with her best friend had triggered a psychotic break. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Victor Hernandez, countered with evidence of Melissa's extensive planning, her methodical execution of the crime, and her careful efforts to frame Tom Wilson, all indicating a sound, if vengeful, mind. "This was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse of reason," Hernandez told the jury during opening statements. "This was a cold, calculated murder planned over days, possibly weeks. The defendant acted with deliberate intent to end Rebecca Wilson's life and to escape consequences by framing the victim's husband." The trial dominated local news and attracted national attention, with media outlets dubbing it the Betrayal's Edge case. True crime enthusiasts dissected every detail, from the forged email to the blood spatter analysis. Psychologists offered theories about Melissa's mental state, and marriage counselors pointed to the case as an extreme example of infidelity's destructive potential. Throughout the proceedings, Ryan Turner sat in the courtroom, visibly diminished by guilt and public scrutiny. He had lost his consulting business, most of his friends, and the respect of his children, who now lived primarily with Diane Adams, Melissa's college roommate, who had stepped in to provide stability during the crisis. Tom Wilson testified for the prosecution, describing his shock at learning of his wife's infidelity only after her murder. "I never got to confront her," he said, his voice breaking. "Never got to decide if we could work through it, or if it was the end." Melissa took that choice from both of us. After a 3-week trial and 11 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity defense and found Melissa Turner guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Caroline Blackwell sentenced her to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. After 30 years, while the court acknowledges the profound betrayal you experienced, Judge Blackwell stated during sentencing, the premeditated nature of this crime, the extreme violence employed, and your efforts to frame an innocent person demonstrate a calculated cruelty that society cannot condone. When offered the opportunity to address the court, Melissa stood calmly, her expression serene despite the heavy sentence just pronounced. "I want my children to know that I love them more than anything in this world," she began. "What I did was wrong by society's standards, but I hope one day they'll understand that I was protecting our family in the only way I knew how. Betrayal destroys not just trust, but identity. Who are you when the foundations of your life prove false?" When I found that email— "Objection," the prosecutor interrupted. "The email was proven to be forged by the defendant herself." "Sustained," Judge Blackwell ruled. Melissa continued without acknowledging the interruption. "I lost everything that defined me, wife, friend, the life I had built. Rebecca stole those things from me, so I took what mattered to her. It wasn't right, but it was just. I regret the pain this has caused my children, but I do not regret what I did to Rebecca Wilson." Her final statement, reported widely in the press, sparked debates about justice, revenge, and the human capacity for violence when fundamentally betrayed. Psychologists pointed to her apparent lack of remorse as evidence of sociopathic tendencies, while others suggested it reflected the depth of her psychological trauma. 2 years into her sentence at the Ohio Reformatory for Women, Melissa granted a single interview to journalist Catherine Martinez, who had been covering the case since the arrest. "Do you ever think about how things might have been different?" Martinez asked through the visitation glass, "if you had confronted them instead of taking such drastic action?" Melissa considered the question, her prison-pale features showing little of the suburban housewife she had once been. Confrontation would have changed nothing. They would have apologized, felt temporarily guilty, then continued their lives. Rebecca would still have her family, her reputation, her future. Where would that leave me? The betrayed wife who either had to forgive the unforgivable or break apart her family. "So you chose a third option." "I chose consequences," Melissa corrected. "In affairs, there are always 3 victims, the 2 spouses and the relationship itself, but there are rarely consequences for the betrayers beyond temporary discomfort. I changed that equation, at the cost of your freedom and your children's." "Mother. My children lost their mother the moment Ryan and Rebecca decided their selfish desires mattered more than their families. I'm just the one who ended up in prison for it. Do you have any contact with Ryan or your children now?" Melissa's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Ryan sends photos and school updates monthly, as required by our custody agreement. Emma writes occasionally, angry letters mostly, demanding explanations I can't give her yet. Jack hasn't been ready to communicate. I understand that." "And if you could go back, would you make the same choice again?" For the first time in the interview, Melissa hesitated. She glanced at her surroundings. The sterile visitation room, the guards positioned by the doors, the other inmates saying their temporary goodbyes to loved ones. "Every action has consequences," she finally said. "Rebecca and Ryan chose theirs. I chose mine. We're all living with them now." As Catherine Martinez concluded the interview and gathered her notes, she asked one final question. "The axe? Why such a violent method? You could have chosen something quicker, cleaner." Melissa Turner's smile was slight but unmistakable. "Because she needed to see it coming. Because I wanted her to know exactly why she was dying and who was taking her life. Because some betrayals can only be answered with something equally primal and devastating. She leaned closer to the glass, and because in her final moments I wanted Rebecca to understand that she had never really known me at all. The Pinewood Grove community gradually recovered from the shocking crime that had exposed the dark undercurrents beneath its placid suburban surface. The Wilson house remained empty for nearly a year before being sold to a family from out of state who knew nothing of its violent history. Tom Wilson relocated to Chicago with his daughter Lily, seeking a fresh start away from the memories and whispers. Ryan Turner eventually moved to Cincinnati with Emma and Jack, where he found work at a smaller firm and attempted to rebuild some semblance of normal family life. According to those close to the family, the children's relationship with their father remained strained, particularly as they grew old enough to fully comprehend the events that had shattered their childhood. And in her cell at the Ohio Reformatory, for women, Melissa Turner maintained her daily routine with the same methodical precision she had once applied to her suburban life and, ultimately, to murder. She participated in prison education programs, kept a journal, and waited patiently for her children to be ready to hear her side of the story. The most frightening aspect of this case, Detective Reeves would later tell a police academy class using Betrayal's Edge as a case study, wasn't the brutality of the crime itself, but how an ordinary person, a mother, teacher, friend, could compartmentalize her humanity so completely in the name of revenge. Melissa Turner wasn't a career criminal or someone with antisocial tendencies. She was someone who decided that vengeance was worth any price, including her own life and her children's well-being. In my 23 years of law enforcement, that calculation, that cold choice, remains the most disturbing thing I've ever encountered. 7 years into Melissa Turner's incarceration, a series of unexpected developments began to shed new light on the case that had captivated the nation's attention. What had once seemed like a straightforward, albeit horrific crime of revenge, was revealed to contain layers of complexity that no one, not even Detective Samantha Reeves, had fully uncovered during the initial investigation. The first revelation came through Emma Turner, who at 21 had grown into a thoughtful, serious young woman studying criminal psychology at Northwestern University. Her academic interest was no coincidence. She had chosen her field specifically to understand the events that had defined her family's tragedy. During her junior year, Emma began an independent research project focused on familial homicides triggered by infidelity. As part of her research, she gained access to the complete case files related to her mother's conviction, evidence documents, interview transcripts, and forensic reports that had previously been unavailable to her. I expected to find confirmation of everything I thought. I knew, Emma later told journalist Catherine Martinez, who had maintained a professional interest in the case. Instead, I found inconsistencies that kept me awake at night. Among the inconsistencies was a financial audit conducted during the murder investigation but never introduced at trial. The audit revealed that Ryan Turner's consulting business had not merely been struggling as he had claimed, but was actively involved in financial improprieties. Several clients had filed complaints alleging fraudulent practices, and Ryan had withdrawn large sums from joint accounts with Melissa, transferring them to offshore accounts only he could access. My father wasn't just having an affair, Emma explained. He was preparing to leave the country with Rebecca and a significant portion of our family's assets. He had purchased one-way tickets to Costa Rica for himself and Rebecca Wilson scheduled for April 21, 2018, just 4 days after my mother killed Rebecca. This discovery prompted Emma to dig deeper. She tracked down former colleagues of her father, including his administrative assistant, Brenda Winters, who had left the company shortly after the murder. Ryan and Rebecca weren't planning a new life. Based on love, Winters revealed in a sworn affidavit, they were running from legal consequences. The investment property Ryan claimed to be working on with Tom Wilson was actually a fraudulent development scheme. They'd collected nearly $2 million from investors for a property that didn't exist. According to Winters, Rebecca had initially discovered the fraud while helping Ryan with marketing materials for the project. Rather than exposing him, she had leveraged her knowledge to become his partner both romantically and criminally, using her reputation and connections to lure in additional investors, including friends from the Pinewood Grove community. They targeted people who trusted them, Winters stated. People like Tom Wilson, who invested his recent inheritance based on his wife's recommendation. People like the members of their church-building committee, who invested the congregation's savings, meant for a new youth center. Emma took this information to Detective Reeves, who had since been promoted to captain, but maintained a personal interest in the case that had defined her career. Reeves agreed to review the new information, leading to the reopening of a limited investigation focused on the financial aspects that had been overlooked. The financial crimes investigation quickly expanded to include federal authorities once the scale of the fraud became apparent. FBI forensic accountants discovered that Ryan and Rebecca had defrauded investors of approximately $3.7 million through various schemes over the course of 3 years, far longer than the 6-month affair they had admitted to. This wasn't a brief indiscretion born of passion, FBI Special Agent Marcus Jones explained at a press conference. This was a calculated criminal partnership that happened to include a sexual component. Turner and Wilson were planning to disappear with millions in fraudulently obtained funds, abandoning their spouses and, in Turner's case, his children. The revelation sent shockwaves through Pinewood Grove and the wider community that had followed. The case. Many who had condemned Melissa now viewed her actions in a more complicated light. While no one condoned murder, the understanding that she had been targeted for abandonment and financial ruin added a dimension to her motive that hadn't been considered during the trial. Ryan Turner, who had rebuilt a modest life in Cincinnati with his children, was arrested on multiple charges of wire fraud, investment fraud, and conspiracy. When faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, he accepted a plea deal, requiring his full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence of 12 years. His cooperation included a full confession that further complicated the narrative surrounding Rebecca Wilson's murder. According to Ryan, both he and Rebecca had grown increasingly concerned about Melissa's suspicions in the weeks leading up to the murder. Rebecca wanted to accelerate our departure, Ryan stated in his deposition. She was convinced Melissa knew something and was gathering evidence. She said we needed to be gone before Melissa could interfere with our plans. Most startlingly, Ryan revealed that Rebecca had considered taking more drastic action. She asked me if I thought Melissa might be unstable enough to harm herself if everything fell apart at once. She talked about making it look like a suicide, said she knew people who had obtained prescription drugs that could be untraceable if administered correctly. I told her she was being dramatic, that Melissa would be hurt but would move on eventually. While there was no evidence that Rebecca had moved beyond hypothetical discussions into actual planning, this revelation suggested a troubling possibility, that Melissa's violent action, while still unjustifiable, might have intercepted plans that threatened her own safety. Captain Reeves, who had built her career on thorough investigation, felt professionally obligated to examine this angle, despite her reluctance to appear sympathetic to a convicted murderer. She ordered a review of Rebecca Wilson's online activities, which had been only cursorily examined during the original investigation. The digital forensics team discovered searches on Rebecca's laptop from the weeks preceding her murder, including undetectable poisons, making death look like suicide, and life insurance policy contestability period. They also found encrypted emails between Rebecca and an unidentified person discussing the procurement of pharmaceuticals not prescribed to her. We can't definitively say that Rebecca Wilson was planning to harm Melissa Turner, Captain Reeves acknowledged in her supplemental report, but there is sufficient evidence to conclude that she was exploring options that would have removed Melissa as an obstacle, potentially through criminal means. These revelations led Emma Turner to petition for her mother's case to be reconsidered in light of the new evidence. Working with a team of law students from the Innocence Project, she argued that the original trial had proceeded without crucial context that might have supported a different defense strategy or resulted in a lesser charge. The petition gained unexpected support from an unlikely source, Tom Wilson. Despite losing his wife to Melissa's violence, he had also been a victim of Rebecca's financial betrayal, losing nearly $600,000 in the investment scheme. "I'm not saying what Melissa did was right," he told reporters outside the courthouse. "Taking a life is never the answer. But knowing what I know now about the person I thought was my wife, I believe Melissa was facing a threat none of us understood at the time. She deserves a chance to have all the facts considered." After months of legal proceedings, the court agreed to hold a hearing to determine whether the new evidence warranted a reconsideration of Melissa's sentence, if not her conviction. The hearing was scheduled for April 17, 2025, almost exactly 7 years after the murder. Melissa Turner was transported from the Ohio Reformatory for Women to the Franklin County Courthouse for the proceedings. Now 49, her appearance had changed dramatically from the polished suburban mother she had once been. Her once highlighted brown hair had turned mostly gray and was cut in a practical prison-short style. The business casual attire she had favored was replaced by a navy blue suit provided by her legal team. Despite these changes, observers noted that her composure remained intact. She walked into the courtroom with the same straight-back dignity she'd maintained throughout her original trial, her gaze immediately finding her daughter in the gallery. Emma had not visited her mother in prison for the first 5 years. Following the conviction, her anger and sense of abandonment too overwhelming to face the woman who had destroyed their family. Their reconciliation had begun tentatively through letters exchanged during Emma's freshman year of college and had gradually progressed to monthly visits over the past 2 years. Jack Turner, now 19, sat beside his sister. Unlike Emma, he had not pursued a path connected to his family's tragedy, instead studying environmental science at a college as far from Ohio as he could manage. His presence at the hearing marked his first time seeing his mother in person since her sentencing 7 years earlier. "I'm not here because I forgive her," he had told Emma during the drive to the courthouse. "I'm here because I need to understand what really happened, all of it." The hearing proceeded with methodical precision as Melissa's legal team presented the new evidence regarding Ryan and Rebecca's financial crimes, the extent of their deception, and the indications that Rebecca might have been contemplating harm to Melissa. The prosecution, while acknowledging the new context, maintained that none of these revelations justified or excused Melissa's decision to commit murder. Even if Mrs. Turner felt threatened, even if she discovered she was being defrauded, the law provides legal remedies. She chose the most extreme form of illegal self-help instead. When Melissa was finally permitted to address the court, a hushed anticipation fell over the room. She stood, adjusted her glasses, another change from the contact lenses she had worn in her previous life, and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Your Honor, I do not stand before you to claim innocence. I killed Rebecca Wilson. I planned it, executed it, and accepted the consequences. What I wish to address is not whether I committed the act, but the fuller context in which that act occurred." She paused, glancing briefly at her children before continuing. 7 years ago, I told this court that I killed Rebecca because she betrayed my trust and threatened my family's happiness. That was true, but incomplete. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was how deep that betrayal went or how significant the threat actually was. Melissa described discovering not just the affair, but indications of financial impropriety that she hadn't fully understood at the time. She recounted finding documents in Ryan's home office showing large withdrawals from their children's college, funds and second mortgages on their home that she hadn't approved. When I confronted Rebecca that day, I asked her about more than just the affair. I asked her where my money had gone. Why were there documents I'd supposedly signed that I had no memory of signing? She laughed at me. She said they'd been planning for over a year, that my signature was easy to forge, and that by the time I figured everything out, they'd be gone. This testimony contradicted her original confession, in which she had focused exclusively on the emotional betrayal of the affair. Captain Reeves, sitting in the gallery, leaned forward with professional interest at this new information. Rebecca told me that I should be grateful they were leaving me the house, even though it was mortgaged beyond its value. She said Ryan had already transferred guardianship of our children to his brother in case I couldn't handle things after they left. When I asked what that meant, she showed me a prescription bottle in her purse and told me they'd considered a more permanent solution to the Melissa problem, but this was cleaner. At this statement, audible reactions rippled through the courtroom. The judge called for order before allowing Melissa to continue. I want to be clear, I am not claiming self-defense in the legal sense. The threat wasn't immediate enough for that. But I believed then, and I believe now, that Rebecca and Ryan presented a genuine danger to my well-being and potentially my life. The financial decimation was already done. The abandonment was planned, and the casual way she discussed drugging me suggested they had contemplated even worse. Melissa's voice remained steady as she concluded. I made a decision in that garage that I can't unmake. I chose to eliminate a threat in the most permanent way possible, and I have spent 7 years taking responsibility for that choice. I don't ask for forgiveness or even understanding. I ask only that the court consider the complete picture that has emerged, rather than the partial one that informed my original sentencing. After 3 days of testimony and deliberation, Judge Marcus Henderson delivered his decision. He acknowledged the significant new context provided by the financial crimes investigation and the evidence suggesting Rebecca Wilson might have presented a threat to Melissa beyond the emotional harm of the affair. While these factors do not excuse the taking of a human life, Judge Henderson stated, they do provide mitigating circumstances that were not available to the court during the original sentencing. In light of this new information, and considering the defendant's exemplary record during her incarceration, I am reducing Mrs. Turner's sentence from life, with the possibility of parole after 30 years, to 20 years, with eligibility for parole after serving 12. For Melissa, who had already served 7 years, this meant the possibility of release in as little as 5 more years, a significant reduction that acknowledged the more complex reality of her case without dismissing the gravity of her crime. Outside the courthouse, Emma and Jack Turner faced the assembled media with the poised dignity they had inherited from both parents. We're grateful that the court has recognized the fuller context of our family's tragedy, Emma stated. Nothing about this situation is simple or easy. A woman lost her life, 2 families were destroyed, and the criminal partnership between her father and Rebecca Wilson victimized many more people in our community. Jack, speaking publicly about the case for the first time, added, I've spent years being angry at my mother for what she did, and part of me still is. But I'm also angry at my father and Rebecca Wilson for the choices they made that created this situation. Everyone in this story made terrible decisions, and everyone has paid consequences, though some more than others. When asked if they would support their mother's eventual parole, the siblings exchanged a glance before Emma answered carefully, "We're taking this one day at a time. We've reconnected with our mother over the past few years and are working toward understanding and healing. Whether that eventually leads to supporting her release will depend on many factors that we're not ready to address publicly." As they departed, Catherine Martinez approached Captain Reeves, who had watched the proceedings with professional interest throughout. "Does this outcome feel just to you, Captain?" Martinez asked. "After all, you built the case that put Melissa Turner away for life." Reeves considered the question with the thoroughness that had defined her career. "Justice isn't a static concept," she finally replied. "It evolves as information evolves. I built the best case I could with the evidence available at the time. The financial crimes, the potential threat to Melissa's life, those weren't part of our understanding then. So you support the reduced sentence. What I support is the legal system's ability to reconsider cases when significant new information comes to light. Melissa Turner committed murder, and she's serving time for that crime. But knowing what we know now about Ryan and Rebecca's plans, about the financial devastation they caused, about the potential threat they posed, yes, I believe the reduced sentence better reflects the complex reality of this case." The captain glanced toward the Turner siblings, now making their way through the crowd. The true victims in all of this are those two young people. They lost both parents in different ways because of a cascade of terrible choices made by the adults who should have protected them. As the media attention gradually faded and Melissa Turner returned to her life in prison, now with a concrete release date to work toward, the ripple effects of the case continued to spread through the lives it had touched. Ryan Turner began serving his 12-year sentence for financial crimes at a federal facility in Pennsylvania, largely abandoned by his former friends and colleagues. According to prison records, neither of his children visited during his first year of incarceration. Tom Wilson sold his remaining assets in Ohio and relocated permanently to Chicago with his daughter Lily. He established a foundation to help victims of financial fraud, particularly those whose trust was exploited by people they considered friends and family. Emma Turner graduated with honors and began working with an organization that supported children of incarcerated parents, using her personal experience to help others navigate similar trauma. Jack continued his environmental studies, finding solace in work that felt removed from the human complications that had defined his childhood. And in her cell at the Ohio Reformatory for Women, Melissa Turner began preparing for a future she had never expected to have, a future beyond prison walls, a future that might include reconnection with her children and eventual reintegration into society. The story of Betrayal's Edge isn't really about a murder, Catherine Martinez wrote in her final article on the case. It's about the human capacity for deception of others and of ourselves. It's about the stories we tell to justify our worst actions and the incomplete information on which we base our most consequential decisions. Most of all, it's about the devastating ripple effects that spread outward when trust is broken in the most fundamental ways. Melissa Turner took a life with an axe in a suburban garage. That fact remains unchanged, but the context in which that act occurred, a context of profound betrayal, financial destruction, and potentially lethal threat, reminds us that the most horrific crimes often happen not in a moment of inexplicable madness, but at the convergence of multiple betrayals, fears, and human failings. There are no heroes in this story, only victims, perpetrators, and those who are somehow both at once. 5 years after the reduction of her sentence, Melissa Turner stood before the Ohio Parole Board on a crisp October morning. Now 54, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, she bore little resemblance to either the polished suburban mother she had once been or the stunned defendant who had confessed to murder 12 years earlier. The intervening years had transformed her in ways beyond the physical. Prison had stripped away the carefully maintained facade of her former life, leaving behind a woman both harder and more authentic than the Melissa who had once hosted neighborhood barbecues and volunteered at school functions. Mrs. Turner, began parole board chairwoman Denise Washington, you've served 12 years of a 20-year sentence for the murder of Rebecca Wilson. During that time, you've maintained an exemplary disciplinary record, completed 3 associate degrees, and established a mentoring program for incoming inmates. These factors speak in your favor. Washington shuffled the papers before her expression neutral. However, the nature of your crime, a premeditated murder carried out with extreme violence, raises serious concerns about the risk you might pose to society if released. We need to understand your current perspective on your actions and the steps you've taken to ensure nothing similar would ever occur again. Melissa nodded, her posture straight but not rigid. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that had developed during her years teaching fellow inmates. 12 years ago, I committed an unforgivable act born from a perfect storm of betrayal, fear, and rage. I've had 4,180 days to reflect on that decision, to understand it without excusing it, to take responsibility without self-destruction, and to build whatever meaning is possible from the aftermath. She paused, gathering thoughts she had rehearsed countless times. The woman who walked into Rebecca Wilson's garage with an axe was someone who believed that violence was her only recourse. She was wrong. There were other options, even in those desperate circumstances. I know that now with absolute clarity. Throughout the 3-hour hearing, board members questioned Melissa extensively about her rehabilitation, her understanding of her crime, and her plans if granted parole. They reviewed statements from victims, including a written submission from Tom Wilson that surprisingly supported her release, citing the complex web of betrayal that engulfed all our families, and his belief that continued incarceration serves no further purpose for anyone involved. Most significant was the in-person testimony of Emma and Jack Turner, now 26 and 24 respectively. Both had maintained contact with their mother throughout her incarceration, gradually rebuilding a relationship fundamentally altered by her actions, but not destroyed by them. My mother committed a terrible crime, Emma stated firmly, her professional demeanor reflecting her position as a victim's advocate with a national non-profit. Nothing can change that fact or bring Rebecca Wilson back to her family, but the woman sitting before you today is not the same person who acted out of desperation and rage 12 years ago. Jack, who had recently completed his PhD in environmental science, spoke more hesitantly but with equal conviction. For years, I couldn't separate my mother from her crime. I saw her only as the person who had destroyed our family with a single violent act. It's taken a long time, and honestly a lot of therapy, to understand that people aren't defined solely by their worst moments, even when those moments are as catastrophic as murder. The most surprising testimony came from Lily Wilson, Rebecca's daughter, now 23. Her presence hadn't been announced in advance, and Melissa visibly paled when the young woman entered the hearing room. I was 11 when Melissa Turner killed my mother, Lily began, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her face. For a long time I thought of her as a monster, this evil woman who took my mom away forever. As I got older and learned more about what my mother and Ryan Turner had been doing, things got more complicated. I still can't forgive Mrs. Turner for choosing violence, but I no longer see her through the black and white lens of childhood. Lily described her own journey of coming to terms with her mother's betrayals, not just of her father and their family, but of the many people she had helped defraud. The hardest part was realizing that I didn't really know my own mother. The person I loved and have grieved was also someone capable of extraordinary deception and cruelty. Her testimony concluded with a statement that visibly moved several board members. I don't oppose Mrs. Turner's parole. Keeping her in prison won't bring my mother back or heal any of the wounds this tragedy created. If anything, it just perpetuates the cycle of damage that has already claimed too many years of too many lives. After deliberating for 45 minutes, the board returned with their decision. Chairwoman Washington addressed Melissa directly. Mrs. Turner, after careful consideration of your case, including your exemplary institutional record, the support of your family, and the unusual circumstances surrounding your crime, this board has voted to grant your parole effective January 15th, 2026. She outlined the strict conditions of Melissa's release: regular meetings with a parole officer, continued psychological counseling, prohibition from contacting Ryan Turner or the investors victimized in his schemes, geographic restrictions preventing her from returning to Pinewood Grove, and a requirement to perform community service related to domestic violence prevention. You've been given a second chance that your victim never received, Washington concluded solemnly. We expect you to honor her memory by living a life that justifies this decision. As the hearing concluded, Catherine Martinez waited outside. Having followed the case since its beginning, now in her 50s and a respected author of true crime books rather than a daily journalist, she had maintained contact with various people connected to the case, including occasional correspondence with Melissa herself. Ms. Martinez, Melissa acknowledged as she was escorted past. Still following the story, I see. Some cases stay with you, Catherine replied. Yours raised questions that went beyond the usual true crime narrative. Melissa nodded. Perhaps we can talk when I'm on the other side of these walls. There are parts of this story that have never been told. 3 months later, on a bitter January morning, Melissa Turner walked out of the Ohio Reformatory for Women carrying a single duffel bag containing the sum of possessions accumulated during 12 years of incarceration. Emma waited beside a sensible sedan in the visitors' parking lot, breath visible in the frigid air. Their embrace was brief but genuine, the cautious physical connection of a relationship rebuilt on new and fragile foundations. No media waited to capture the moment. Catherine Martinez had respected Melissa's request for privacy during the transition, agreeing to meet weeks later instead. Ready? Emma asked simply. Melissa took a final look at the imposing brick building that had been her home for over a decade. Yes, she replied, more than ready. The apartment Emma had secured for her mother was a modest one-bedroom in Columbus, close enough to Emma's own home for regular visits, but far enough from Pinewood Grove to comply with parole restrictions. The furnishings were simple but thoughtful. Bookshelves for Melissa's accumulated volumes, a desk for the writing she had taken up in prison, comfortable seating that acknowledged her recurring back pain from years on institutional mattresses. Jack helped pick out the furniture, Emma explained as they entered. He wanted to be here today, but he's presenting at a conference in Seattle. He'll come this weekend. Melissa nodded, running her hand along the back of a blue armchair. This is more than I expected, thank you. The first weeks of freedom brought a cascade of adjustments. Technology had advanced significantly during Melissa's incarceration. Smartphones had become ubiquitous, social media had transformed, and ordinary tasks from banking to grocery shopping now often involved digital interfaces that hadn't existed. When she went to prison, Emma and Jack helped navigate these changes with patience, introducing new concepts gradually and celebrating small victories like Melissa's first successful online order or independent navigation of public transportation. They established a routine of family dinners twice weekly, Monday evenings at Emma's apartment with her partner Michael, Fridays at Melissa's with whoever could attend. During these gatherings, they carefully navigated conversation around the subjects that still carried emotional landmines: Ryan's continued incarceration, the lasting trauma of the murder and its aftermath, and the complex legacy of Rebecca Wilson in all their lives. 6 weeks after her release, Melissa fulfilled her promise to meet with Catherine Martinez. They sat at a quiet corner table in a cafe near Melissa's apartment, the journalist's recording device between them capturing their conversation for what would become the final chapter of Martinez's book about the case. "How does it feel to be free?" Catherine began with the obvious question. Melissa considered thoughtfully before answering. "Freedom is more complicated than I imagined during those years inside. There's the physical freedom, of course, being able to walk outside whenever I want, to choose my own meals, to see the stars at night. But there's also a weight to it, the responsibility of making choices again, of navigating relationships, of facing people who know what I did, and how are people responding to you? Cautiously, mostly. My neighbors know my background. Transparency was part of the housing arrangement. They're polite, but distant. My parole officer arranged a job at a fulfillment center where several other former inmates work, so there's a shared understanding there." Catherine nodded, making notes even as the recorder captured their words. "And your relationship with your children? That seems to have evolved significantly since the early years after your conviction." "Emma reached out first, during her freshman year of college," Melissa explained. "She was angry, rightfully so, but also confused. She'd begun to learn about her father's financial crimes and was trying to make sense of what that meant for her understanding of our family's destruction." She smiled slightly, pride evident in her expression. "Emma has always been remarkably methodical, even as a child. She approached reconciliation like a research project, identifying questions, seeking answers, processing the information before moving forward. Jack was different. His anger ran deeper and lasted longer. He needed more time. And now we're building something new, not recreating what was lost. That's impossible and probably unwise. Instead, we're establishing adult relationships based on honesty and the shared experience of surviving trauma, albeit trauma I partially caused." Catherine's next question cut to the heart of what readers had always wondered about the case. "Do you regret killing Rebecca Wilson?" Melissa didn't flinch from the directness. "Yes and no, and I know how terrible that sounds. I regret choosing violence. I regret the pain I caused, especially to Lily, who lost her mother regardless of what Rebecca had done. I regret the years separated from my children during critical stages of their development." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I can't honestly say I regret stopping Rebecca and Ryan from completing their plans, which we now know included not just financial destruction and abandonment, but potentially worse. The court accepted evidence that Rebecca had researched, methods to harm me. What I regret is not finding a legal way to protect myself and my family." This nuanced response reflected the complexity that had always made the case compelling. Melissa Turner wasn't a sympathetic victim-turned-vigilante, nor was she a cold-blooded killer without justification. She existed in the complicated middle ground of human experience, someone who had committed an unquestionably wrong act in response to genuine wrongs against her. "Your story challenges people's desire for clear-cut moral categories," Catherine observed. "Many find that uncomfortable." "Reality is rarely comfortable," Melissa replied. "One thing prison teaches you is that most people's stories are more complicated than they appear from the outside. The woman in for drug possession was self-medicating childhood trauma. The check fraudster was trying to feed her children after escaping abuse. This doesn't excuse their crimes, or mine, but it does demand a more nuanced understanding." Their conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, covering Melissa's prison experience, her ongoing processing of the events that led to the murder, and her hopes for the future. modest ambitions centered around rebuilding relationships with her children, contributing positively to her community through volunteer work and finding personal peace. As they prepared to part, Catherine asked one final question. "Have you had any contact with Ryan since your release?" Melissa shook her head. "No, and I don't expect to. Our parole conditions prohibit contact, and even without that restriction, I don't believe there's anything constructive that could come from such an interaction. We've both had years to reflect on the choices that led to tragedy. Whatever understanding he's reached is his own journey, as mine has been mine." The publication of Catherine Martinez's book, Betrayal's Edge, Deception, Revenge, and Redemption, brought renewed attention to the case the following year. Its nuanced portrayal of all involved parties received critical acclaim, with reviewers praising its refusal to reduce complex human beings to simplified caricatures of victim and villain. In an unexpected development, the book's release coincided with Ryan Turner's first public statement since his financial crimes conviction. Through his attorney, he issued a written apology to those he had defrauded, to his children for his abandonment and betrayal, and, most surprisingly, to Melissa. While nothing can justify the violent act that took Rebecca's life, the statement read, "I acknowledge my significant role in creating the circumstances that led to that tragic outcome. My selfish choices and extensive deceptions destroyed multiple lives, including those of my children, my wife, my lover, and ultimately myself. I offer this acknowledgement not to shift blame from Melissa's actions, but to accept my own moral responsibility in this tragedy." The statement generated mixed responses. Some saw it as a genuine step toward accountability, while others dismissed it as the self-serving gesture of a man still serving time for significant financial crimes. For Emma and Jack Turner, it represented a complexity they had long ago accepted. That responsibility for their family's destruction could not be assigned to a single person or action. On the first anniversary of her release, Melissa fulfilled the final request she had made to the parole board, a carefully structured meeting with Lily Wilson, facilitated by a restorative justice mediator. Emma attended as support for both women, having developed a tentative friendship with Lily through their communication during Melissa's parole hearing preparations. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a conference room at the Restorative Justice Center in Columbus. When Lily entered, the physical resemblance to her mother momentarily startled Melissa. Now 24, Lily had the same vivid red hair and expressive features that had once been Rebecca's most striking characteristics. "Thank you for agreeing to this," Melissa began once they were seated. "I know it can't be easy." Lily's expression remained carefully neutral. "I've spent years thinking about what I would say if we ever met like this. The honest answer is that I'm still figuring it out." Their conversation progressed cautiously, with the mediator guiding them through difficult moments. Lily asked questions she had carried since childhood, about the day of the murder, about Melissa's perspective on Rebecca beyond the betrayal, about whether she had considered the impact on an 11-year-old girl who would grow up without her mother. Melissa answered each question directly, neither minimizing her responsibility nor deflecting with explanations of mitigating circumstances. When Lily asked if she had felt remorse immediately after the killing, Melissa admitted a truth she had rarely voiced. "No. In that moment, and for some time afterward, I felt justified. The remorse came later, in waves, as I began to comprehend the full impact of what I'd done, not just to Rebecca but to you, to my own children, to both our families." "When," Lily pressed, "when did you start feeling remorse?" "It began the first time I saw Emma after my arrest. The devastation in her eyes, this confusion about how her mother could have done something so horrific, that's when the reality started breaking through the righteousness I'd been clinging to." Toward the end of their 2-hour session, Lily shared something unexpected. "I found my mother's journals after her death. My dad had packed them away, but I discovered them when we moved to Chicago. Reading them was illuminating." She hesitated, then continued. "She wrote about the affair, about the financial schemes, about their plans to leave. But she also wrote about your friendship, about how guilty she felt betraying someone who had been like a sister to her, and about how she justified it to herself." "And how did she justify it?" Melissa asked quietly. "By convincing herself you would be fine without them, that you were resilient enough to rebuild, that the deception was ultimately kinder than the truth." Lily shook her head slightly. She was expert at rationalizing her choices, something I've had to recognize in myself as well. As their meeting concluded, neither woman suggested a future relationship. Some bridges, once broken, cannot be rebuilt, but they had achieved something significant, a moment of honest reckoning that acknowledged the complexity of human motivations and the far-reaching consequences of betrayal. In the years that followed, Melissa Turner continued her quiet reconstruction of a life forever altered by one violent act. She transitioned from the fulfillment center to administrative work at a non-profit serving formerly incarcerated women. She maintained her relationships with Emma and Jack, eventually becoming a grandmother when Emma gave birth to a daughter. Named Claire, the story of Betrayal's edge gradually faded from public consciousness, supplanted by newer tragedies and sensational crimes. But for those intimately connected to the case, its lessons remained ever present, a cautionary tale about the devastating power of deception, the human capacity for both manipulation and violence when cornered, and the long shadow that a single act of destruction can cast across generations. On the 15th anniversary of Rebecca Wilson's death, Melissa visited her grave for the first and only time. She brought no flowers, made no dramatic gestures. She simply stood silently, acknowledging the complexity of their shared history, two women whose lives had become inextricably linked through friendship, betrayal, and ultimately blood. No cameras recorded this private pilgrimage. No journalists interpreted its meaning. It was, perhaps, the most honest moment in the entire tragic saga, a quiet reckoning between the dead and the living, between past actions and present consequences, between justice and the messy reality of human existence. As Melissa turned to leave, an elderly groundskeeper nodded in passing. "Friend or family?" he asked. The standard question for visitors to the cemetery. Melissa paused, considering the inadequacy of either category to capture the tangled relationship that had defined and destroyed both their lives. "It's complicated," she finally replied. The old man nodded sagely. "Most important ones are, ma'am, most important ones are." 20 years after Rebecca Wilson's murder, the case that had once captivated the nation became the subject of academic study and professional analysis. Criminal justice programs used it to explore the intersections of financial crime, intimate partner betrayal, and violent response. Law schools examined it as a case study in how new evidence can alter sentencing outcomes. Psychologists referenced it when discussing the human capacity for compartmentalization and the potential for violence in otherwise ordinary individuals. But beyond these academic considerations, the ripple effects continued through the lives of those directly touched by the tragedy. Ryan Turner was released from federal prison after serving his full 12-year sentence, having been denied parole twice due to what the board described as insufficient demonstration of genuine remorse and rehabilitation. Unlike Melissa, whose re-entry had been supported by her children and carefully planned, Ryan emerged into a world largely indifferent to his return. He settled in Florida, far from Ohio and the memories of his former life. According to public records, he found work as a bookkeeper at a small construction company, a significant step down from his previous career, but one of the few options available to someone with his criminal record. Occasional social media posts from distant acquaintances suggested he had remarried, though neither Emma nor Jack acknowledged this development publicly. Their relationship with their father remained the most complicated aspect of the aftermath. Jack, after years of refusing contact, eventually agreed to meet Ryan during the final year of his incarceration. A single visit that Jack later described in a private blog as neither the confrontation nor the reconciliation I had imagined, but something more mundane and therefore more difficult to categorize. Emma maintained more regular, if limited, communication with Ryan, motivated partly by her professional interest in restorative justice and partly by her determination to understand all facets of her family's disintegration. When asked about these contacts during a professional conference where she presented on supporting children of incarcerated parents, Emma offered a response that resonated with many attendees. "Forgiveness isn't a single decision or moment," she explained. "It's a continuous process of choosing to not be defined or consumed by another person's actions, while still acknowledging the harm they caused. Some days that's easier than others. Some relationships can be rebuilt in new forms, while others may never move beyond basic civility. Both outcomes can be forms of healing." Melissa Turner's post-prison life evolved into something few would have predicted during the sensational days of her trial. After 5 years of work at the non-profit supporting formerly incarcerated women, she received a master's degree in counseling through an online program and established a small practice specializing in trauma recovery and betrayal trauma. Her background, which she disclosed up front to potential clients, became not a hindrance, but a unique qualification in working with people navigating the aftermath of profound betrayal. She published a modest memoir titled After the Axe, Reflections on Violence, Consequences and Rebuilding, which avoided sensationalizing the murder while providing unflinching insight into the mindset that had led to her violent response and her subsequent journey toward understanding. "Violence solved nothing," she wrote in one frequently quoted passage. "It didn't undo the betrayal. It didn't protect my children from loss and trauma. It didn't restore what had been taken from me. Instead, it compounded tragedy with tragedy, adding my own destructive choices to those already made by others. If there's any value in my story, it's as a warning about the seductive clarity of rage when confronted with betrayal, the false promise that one irrevocable act can balance the scales of injustice." The memoir attracted both criticism and praise, with some reviewers condemning what they perceived as an attempt to profit from murder, while others acknowledged its nuanced exploration of accountability without excuses. Sales were modest but steady, particularly in academic settings and therapy training programs, where its complex navigation of moral ambiguity proved valuable. Lily Wilson, who had maintained occasional contact with the Turner siblings following the restorative justice meeting with Melissa, eventually became a family law attorney specializing in high-conflict divorce cases. In an interview with a legal journal, she credited her career choice to witnessing firsthand the catastrophic consequences when family conflicts escalate beyond legal remedies. "The court system failed my mother and the Turners long before violence occurred," she observed. "There were numerous points where intervention might have led to a different outcome, when suspicious financial transactions began, when the affair developed, when threats were contemplated. My work focuses on identifying those intervention points before situations become irreparable." Tom Wilson, who had rebuilt his life in Chicago, maintained a close relationship with his daughter while deliberately stepping back from any public discussion of the case that had defined their family tragedy. He remarried 7 years after Rebecca's death to a widow he met through a support group for people who had lost spouses under traumatic circumstances. According to those who knew him, he found a measure of peace in this new relationship and in his role as grandfather to Lily's children. The physical locations tied to the tragedy underwent their own transformations. The Wilson house in Pinewood Grove, after changing hands several times, was eventually purchased by a young couple unaware of its history until neighbors discreetly informed them. Rather than being disturbed by this knowledge, they chose to completely renovate the property, including demolishing and rebuilding the garage where the murder had occurred, a physical erasure of the space that had contained such violence. The Turner family home, which had been sold during Melissa's incarceration to cover legal expenses and financial obligations, became a rental property passing through multiple tenants who gradually diluted its association with the notorious case. Pinewood Grove itself evolved as communities do. New families moved in, businesses changed, and the murder that had once defined the suburb became a historical footnote rather than a defining characteristic. On the 25th anniversary of the murder, Catherine Martinez published a follow-up article examining the long-term impacts of the case on criminal justice approaches to crimes involving complex relational betrayals. The article included brief updates on the principal figures, but focused primarily on systemic changes partially influenced by the Turner case, including enhanced forensic accounting in domestic violence investigations, greater attention to potential financial abuse within relationships, and the increased implementation of restorative justice practices. 25 years later, the legacy of Betrayal's Edge extends beyond the individual tragedy to how we understand and address the intersection of intimate betrayal, financial exploitation, and violence. Martinez wrote, "What appeared initially as a straightforward case of murderous revenge revealed itself over time as something far more complex, a cascade of deceptions, threats, and failures across multiple systems that might have intervened before violence became the final, irrevocable response." Emma Turner, now a respected authority in her field and mother to 2 children, offered a final comment for the anniversary article that perhaps best encapsulated the enduring lesson of the case. "My mother made an unforgivable choice in that garage 25 years ago," she acknowledged, "but that choice occurred within a context of equally destructive decisions by my father and Rebecca Wilson. None of these individual actions happened in isolation. They formed a tragic sequence that could have been interrupted at multiple points if transparency, accountability, and appropriate intervention had occurred. The true cautionary tale isn't just about the dangers of betrayal or the destructive power of revenge," Emma concluded. "It's about the consequences of allowing deceptions to compound unchecked and the false belief that there are simple victims and villains in the collapse of intimate relationships." 25 years later, I've learned that most human tragedies occur not through the actions of monsters, but through the accumulated choices of ordinary people who lose sight of the devastating ripple effects their decisions will create. As darkness fell on that anniversary evening, 3 candles burned in separate locations across the country, one in Melissa's modest apartment in Columbus, one in Emma's family home in Chicago, and one on Rebecca's grave, placed by Lily during her annual visit. 3 flames marking a single tragedy that had forever altered their interconnected lives, illuminating briefly against the gathering shadows before flickering out. Ephemeral reminders of how quickly light can turn to darkness when trust is betrayed and rage takes control. 30 years after Rebecca Wilson's murder, the case that had once dominated headlines returned to public attention through an unexpected source. A documentary filmmaker named Maya Sutherland, known for her nuanced exploration of complex criminal cases, approached the principal survivors with a proposal to re-examine the Betrayal's Edge case through a contemporary lens: criminal justice. Perspectives have evolved significantly since the early 2000s, Sutherland explained in her pitch. We now understand more about trauma responses, financial abuse as a form of domestic violence, and the psychological impact of profound betrayal. This case, perhaps more than any other from that era, deserves reconsideration with these updated frameworks. The response to Sutherland's proposal revealed how differently each person had processed the decades-old tragedy. Melissa Turner, now in her 70s and retired from her counseling practice, initially declined participation. Having made peace with her past and established a quiet life focused on her family and volunteer work with prison literacy programs, she expressed reluctance to revisit public scrutiny. "I've said everything I needed to say," she wrote in her response to Sutherland. "The facts are well documented, my responsibility has been acknowledged, and the context has been explored in depth by previous journalists and in my own writing. I'm not convinced another examination serves any purpose beyond entertainment." By contrast, Ryan Turner, living in semi-obscurity in a Florida retirement community, eagerly accepted the opportunity. Now in his late 70s, with deteriorating health and estranged from much of his former life, he viewed the documentary as perhaps his final chance to shape his legacy. "People only know part of the story," he insisted during his preliminary interview. "I've been cast as the villain all these years, but Rebecca was the driving force behind everything. She pushed for the affair, she orchestrated the financial schemes," she suggested, running away together. "I was weak, not evil." Emma and Jack Turner approached the project with professional caution. Now established in their respective fields, Emma as the executive director of a national organization supporting families affected by incarceration, Jack as an environmental science professor at a prestigious university, they had long ago developed strategies for managing public interest in their family tragedy. "We'll consider participation," Emma responded on behalf of both siblings, "provided the project maintains the complexity this case demands and avoids sensationalizing the violence that destroyed multiple lives. We won't contribute to anything that traumatizes the next generation of our family for the sake of viewership." The most surprising response came from Lily Wilson Barnes, who not only agreed to participate, but offered access to materials never before made public: her mother's complete journals, correspondence between Rebecca and Ryan predating their affair, and financial records discovered among Rebecca's personal effects years after her death. "For 3 decades, I've protected certain aspects of my mother's life out of loyalty and love," Lily explained during her first meeting with Sutherland. "But I'm 61 now, older than my mother ever got to be. I've spent more of my life without her than with her. At this point, I believe the complete truth serves everyone better than protective silence." The documentary project, initially conceived as a 4-part series, expanded as these new materials revealed previously unexplored dimensions of the case. Most significantly, Rebecca's journals documented a pattern of manipulation and calculated decision-making that contradicted the narrative of a passionate affair born of genuine emotion. "Ryan is easily influenced," Rebecca had written 18 months before the murder. A compliment about his business acumen, a suggestion that his wife doesn't appreciate his ambition, and he's immediately receptive. "I almost feel guilty about how simple this is, but the potential payoff is too substantial to ignore. Tom would never agree to the Westlake investment on his own, but with Ryan as a partner in the venture, he won't question it." Later entries detailed her growing concerns about Melissa's potential interference. MT noticed the pendant today, caught her staring at it during book club. "She's always been too observant for her own good. Might need to accelerate our timeline before she connects the dots." And most disturbingly, in an entry dated just 1 week before her death, "Discussed contingency plans with R today. He's squeamish." about anything too drastic, but he'll come around if necessary. Better for everyone if MT is too overwhelmed to function when everything falls apart. A few pills in her evening wine during a supportive visit from her concerned best friend could be explained away easily enough, especially with her family history of depression. These revelations fundamentally altered the understanding of the case that had persisted for 3 decades. What had been viewed as a crime of passion in response to infidelity now appeared potentially closer to preemptive self-defense against a credible threat, still illegal and unjustifiable under the law, but morally more ambiguous than previously understood. When presented with these journal entries, Melissa Turner finally agreed to participate in the documentary, though with strict limitations on her involvement. "I never knew about these specific plans," she clarified in her on-camera interview. "I sensed a threat, found evidence of betrayal beyond the affair, and made a terrible choice in response. Nothing in Rebecca's journals justifies or excuses my actions, but they do perhaps explain why I perceive the situation as immediately dangerous rather than merely heartbreaking." Ryan Turner's reaction to the journal revelations proved equally revealing. During filming at his Florida condominium, Sutherland read excerpts aloud and recorded his unscripted response. His initial denial, "She never wrote that," quickly shifted to deflection. Rebecca was prone to dramatic exaggeration, and finally to anger. "You're trying to make me the monster in this story." When pressed specifically about the discussions of drugging Melissa, Ryan terminated the interview, demanding the crew leave his home. He withdrew from the project entirely the following day, though his previously recorded segments remained available for use under the terms of his participation agreement. As production continued, Sutherland expanded her investigation beyond them, central figures to include others tangentially connected to the case. She located former inmates who had known Melissa during her incarceration, clients who had sought counseling from her after her release, and investors who had lost significant savings in Ryan and Rebecca's financial schemes. These additional perspectives enriched the documentary's examination of how a single criminal act creates expanding circles of impact across decades. Harold Jenkins, the neighbor who had noticed nothing unusual about Melissa the morning after she discovered the affair, reflected on how the case had permanently altered his perception of others. "You think you know people," he observed, sitting in the same living room from which he had watched the Turner family's comings and goings 30 years earlier. "You see them mowing their lawn, walking their dog, helping their kids with homework. But we're all just watching the surface, aren't we? Who knows what's happening behind closed doors, what pressures are building, what breaking points are approaching. After what happened with Melissa, I never again assumed I really knew anyone in my neighborhood." Brenda Winters, the administrative assistant who had provided key testimony about Ryan and Rebecca's financial crimes, offered insight into the workplace dynamics that had preceded the tragedy. Now in her 70s and long retired, she described watching the relationship develop through subtle changes in office behavior. "It wasn't just an affair," she emphasized. "It was like watching two people construct an alternate reality together, one where their actions had no consequences for others. They'd have these hushed conversations that would stop when anyone approached, but you could see the excitement in their expressions, not just romantic excitement, but the thrill of getting away with something. There was a cruelty to it that I couldn't articulate then, but recognized immediately when the truth came out. Perhaps most poignant were the interviews with Emma's and Lily's adult children, the next generation who had grown up in the shadow of events they hadn't witnessed, but which fundamentally shaped their family narratives. Claire Turner Brandon, Emma's eldest daughter and now a clinical psychologist, described the complex legacy of being Melissa Turner's granddaughter. "I was 12 when my grandmother was released from prison," she recalled. old enough to understand. What she had done, young enough to be terrified the first time we met. I expected to see something monstrous in her, some visible mark of violence or evil. Instead, I found this soft-spoken woman who taught me to knit and never raised her voice, even when frustrated. Claire paused, considering her words carefully. The most important lesson from our family history isn't about the capacity for violence in ordinary people, though that's certainly part of it. It's about how we metabolize betrayal, how we respond when the foundations of our reality are shattered. My grandmother chose the most destructive possible response, and 3 generations of our family have been processing the consequences of that choice. As the documentary progressed through production, an unexpected development occurred that added a final significant dimension to the story. Thomas Wilson, Rebecca's widower, who had maintained his privacy for 3 decades while rebuilding his life in Chicago, contacted Sutherland after learning of the project from his daughter. Now 83, and in declining health, Tom requested a single interview to address aspects of the case that had remained unexplored. Seated in the assisted living facility where he had moved following a stroke 2 years earlier, he spoke with remarkable clarity about the aftermath of his wife's murder and the revelations that followed. People always assumed I was simply a victim in all this, the deceived husband, the grieving widower. The truth is more complicated. He sighed, the weight of 3 decades of silence evident in his expression. I suspected Rebecca was having an affair months before her death. I hired a private investigator who confirmed my suspicions and uncovered preliminary evidence of the financial improprieties. This revelation added yet another layer to the already complex narrative. Tom explained that he had been preparing to confront Rebecca and initiate divorce proceedings, including forensic accounting of their finances, when her murder suddenly rendered these plans irrelevant. I was angry, devastated, and then, I'm ashamed to admit, somewhat relieved, he confessed. Her death, as horrible as it was, spared me from what would have been an ugly public exposure of her betrayal. It allowed me to preserve Lily's image of her mother, at least temporarily, and it simplified the financial aftermath, since criminal investigations into Rebecca and Ryan's schemes might have implicated me through association, despite my ignorance of the details. When asked why he had kept this information private for so long, even during Melissa's trial, when it might have provided context for her actions, Tom's response was simple: to protect Lily. She was 11 years old and had just lost her mother. In the most traumatic way possible, how could I then destroy the mother she remembered by exposing Rebecca as not just a victim, but someone who had been planning to abandon her daughter? That seemed like a second form of violence I couldn't inflict. This final piece of the puzzle completed a picture of a tragedy in which nearly every participant had withheld crucial information, Melissa concealing her knowledge of the affair until it culminated in violence. Ryan and Rebecca hiding their financial crimes and plans for abandonment, and Tom suppressing his awareness and planned response to his wife's betrayal. The documentary, titled Betrayal's Edge, The Unfinished Story, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival to critical acclaim and immediately sparked renewed public discourse about the case. Criminal justice experts debated whether contemporary laws regarding self-defense against credible threats might have altered Melissa's legal outcome. Financial abuse specialists cited the case as a seminal example of how economic violence often precedes physical violence. Psychologists examined the collective trauma experienced by all connected families across multiple generations. In the final sequence of the documentary, Sutherland brought together Melissa Turner, Emma and Jack Turner, Lily Wilson Barnes and Tom Wilson for the first time in 30 years. Filmed in a neutral location with appropriate support personnel present, this meeting was not the dramatic confrontation some viewers might have expected, but rather a somber reflection on shared tragedy from people who had spent decades processing its impact. "None of us are the same people we were 30 years ago," Melissa observed as they sat in a circle, the physical manifestation of lives forever interconnected by blood and betrayal. The choices made then, by all of us, created ripples that can never be fully resolved, only integrated into the people we've become. Tom Wilson, who would pass away 3 months after filming, offered what became the documentary's closing statement. "The truth is, there was never just one betrayal that led to this tragedy. There were dozens, small and large, spread across years, committed by each of us in different ways. Rebecca betrayed me, betrayed Melissa, betrayed our daughter's future. Ryan betrayed his family and his business associates. I betrayed the legal process by withholding what I knew. Melissa betrayed the most fundamental social contract by taking a life." He looked around the circle, his gaze resting finally on Lily. "And in various ways, we've all betrayed the next generation by allowing this cycle of secrets and evasions to continue for so long. Perhaps the only redemption possible now is in finally breaking that cycle." As the credits rolled on Sutherland's documentary, viewers were left not with neat conclusions, but with an invitation to consider how differently the tragedy might have unfolded had any of the principal figures chosen transparency over deception, legal remedies over private vengeance, or direct confrontation over secretive planning. In that sense, the betrayal's edge case remains perpetually unfinished, a cautionary tale without clear heroes or villains, a tragedy with multiple authors, and a reminder that the most dangerous weapon in human relationships is not the physical tools of violence, but the capacity for calculated deception by those we trust most. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.